I mean, God has brought me through quite a journey. He's been so patient with me, and uh, I have a 40-year history of really self-serving, destructive,
Yeah.
uh, and at the same time, materially prosperous life
Yeah.
that God is in the process of redeeming.
Yeah.
And, you know, when I think about my life before, it is, it's hard. It makes me cringe. I make facial expressions like it's like eating a lemon drop. It's sour.
Yeah.
And yet, it propels me, it informs me, it guides me, and the great story of what our God does is he doesn't just transform us. He redeems all that stuff.
Absolutely.
And it's one thing to say, oh, I'm a new person now, and the idea is I'm going to sin less, and
Yeah.
I'm going to hurt fewer people, and I'm going to be relationally on balance a donor rather than a consumer. All of
Yeah.
these ideas, it's all,
Yeah.
but that's actually not the story, right?
No.
The
No.
story is a redemption story. So every tear, every hurt, every sorrow, everything that I inflicted could
Yeah.
actually be used for the good, right? It's the whole thing,
Amen.
man.
Welcome to the Embracing Brokenness podcast, where our goal is to engage with all of those willing to venture deeper into their transformational journey with Christ. Here's your host and co-founder of Embracing Brokenness Ministries, Steve Adams.
Well, hi, everyone. Welcome to the Embracing Brokenness podcast. I'm your host, Steve Adams, and I'm so glad you decided to join us today. If you got that little teaser in advance, you heard Chip Skowron. He was a medical doctor, PhD, hedge fund guy. It's an amazing story. So you're going to want to tune in for the whole entire time that we have together. Really, really interesting way that God intervened in his life, much the way he did even in my own. So we have a lot in common. He joined the Prison Entrepreneurship Program, which is PEP. So PEP.org, if you want to check it out. About 7 months ago in 2024 as their CEO. Now, just to give you a little backdrop for that, okay, Chip, he's a graduate of Vanderbilt University, receiving both a medical degree from the School of Medicine and a PhD from the Department of Cell Biology at Yale. So, yeah, smart guy. And you'll see why his leadership skills are going to an incredible cause right now. Excited for you to hear about it, but he has a backstory too. We'll get to it. He continued his medical training for 4 years at the Harvard Orthopedic Surgery Program before making a pretty significant change in his career, you could say that for sure, by moving into the world of finance in 2001. Now, in 2003, Chip launched the Front Point Healthcare Hedge Fund as its portfolio manager. Definitely a big difference from being in medicine to managing a portfolio, a big one, which actually became one of the largest healthcare funds in the world. I think they under management like $3.5 billion in assets. Pretty amazing. But in 2011, here's where the story turns quite a bit. Chip was indicted for insider trading and then began to serve 4 years in federal prison in 2012. All right. Well, since his release, he's devoted much of his time to prison ministry through his nonprofit, New Canaan Society, and serving on the National Board of Prison Fellowship. And many of you know who that is. Chuck Colson started Prison Fellowship. He's been on their board. His entrepreneurial endeavors also included a few things that you would find really interesting when you think about it. 3 SPACs he started, an engineering, procurement, and construction company focused on solar energy, and a real estate venture. Dig deeper, you'll learn more about that. Now, Chip has been involved in the nonprofit space since 93, I believe, served on multiple boards, volunteered his time as a medical doctor. He's an active member of his church, Trinity Church in Greenwich, Connecticut. Interesting, he actually commutes from Greenwich to Houston, where PEP is located as their CEO. We'll get into that a little bit more. He enjoys his family, teaching at the graduate level, exercising, participating in several men's Christian fellowships. We talk about that. And he and his wife, they live in Connecticut with their 4 children and 2 dogs. That's my favorite part, the 2-dog part. No, not really. But you're going to hear a lot today. It's going to inspire you, but it's also going to challenge you to go deeper even into your own journey when you hear his story of transformation and what God did in his life. So without further ado, Chip Skowron. Well, Chip, welcome to the podcast. You know, this is been a little while. You and I got a chance to meet prior to this, but I also know that your schedule is pretty jammed up and you got a lot going on. And but I also know that our audience is very interested in hearing your story, what God did in your life, and we've had this opportunity to share some of that on and off camera here, as you might imagine. But here's the thing, right? Not many people, I just want to state this, have a Wikipedia page. Sorry, I had to do it. But you do. So does that mean you've arrived, or you're just notorious or something like that? What does that mean?
Well, I think it depends what your Wikipedia page says, Steve. Thanks for having me, by the way.
Yeah.
Yeah, as long as we start there. Yeah, there obviously I have not ever contributed to that page, but there are some things that are very accurate, and there's some things that are not accurate. And you know, my hope is that in the Wikipedia page in heaven, that there's a redemptive aspect to everything God is doing, and a lot of the things that are true in that page that have caused a lot of damage and hurt a lot of people because of my own selfishness and insufficiency. All that can be redeemed and restored and used for the good. So I'm not really worried about my worldly Wikipedia page, but I know I have another one that really matters.
That's a great segue. Way to pick that up, because you didn't see that coming. I know you didn't. But
I did not see that coming.
So it's kind of interesting how we got a lot of ground to cover today, but how you and I first met, introduced by a mutual friend or acquaintance, Preston Hay, if you're listening, thank you.
Thank you.
He thought that, you know, we had some things in common. Well, the first one is we love Jesus, so that's number one. But secondly, we have a, let's call it this, because of even our ministry, by the name you can tell, Embracing Brokenness. We have a heart for people who the rest of society would consider marginalized, or they kind of send them out here on the outskirts because they're afraid to encounter it. They don't really understand the brokenness that exists in the folks like you and I do, and that be in prison ministry mostly, although we did a lot of it in homeless ministry ourselves. But that comes from some of our own issues, right? We have that in common too. We spend a little time there, both of us. So yeah, when you think of the folks that you are now ministering to, what's the first thing that comes to mind, and how the rest of the world even views them?
Well, I mean, I start with my own number, 641-63054, right?
Yeah.
So I have a registration number with the federal government as a prisoner. And so these are not, for me, those people. They are my people. They are my brothers and sisters. And they have different circumstances today in their lives. But at one point, I was actually where they are if they're in prison. And what I found when I was there walking with them is that the circumstances of their lives in most cases were far worse than anything that I had experienced. And as I was reminded over and over again, I might not have done as well if I had been in their shoes. And there's also a recognition that left to my own devices, my own story would have gone far darker and far deeper down the rabbit hole of destruction than it did. But God chose to intervene in my life and I'm so thankful that he did, and has been restoring and redeeming. And my expectation and my hope is that every single one of these stories can be not just, transformed, but then redeemed.
Yes.
And that like I am experiencing my life, some of the greatest sorrows and greatest regrets can be turned into good. And, I'm surrounded by extraordinary examples of that. And what's something that's been coming to me in the last week or so is how, in pop culture, in the world today, these stories of redemption are actually not well known. They're not actually celebrated.
Yeah.
And there are fictional examples, right? Ebenezer Scrooge and
Yeah.
the Grinch, and
Right.
even Darth Vader, and Jean Valjean, Victor Hugo's from Les Mis. These are, but they're all fiction.
Yeah.
Every single one of them is fiction. And, I want these stories to be celebrated, because these are the best stories I've ever heard.
I know. And we got the similarly, right? So I got to experience some of that myself. One of the things that were striking to me was, and you probably found this to be true, is that I would never have rubbed elbows with a lot of the folks that I had the opportunity to spend a short time with. Your time was longer, but it also opened up my awareness to that. Hey, they're all God. They're all created in the image of God. Every one of us. And you're right about the stories. The stories are heartbreaking. There's no way I would have survived. I would have been sitting right there or worse, right? But for God's grace, there's been so much of that in my own life. So I think it's important especially for our audience to understand. We're not here to try and to aggrandize, I guess you could say, what happened in our lives, and we're some heroes here. What we are is we were pretty broken to make the decisions that we made. And I know you, for much of your life, there's a backstory to that, and maybe it would be helpful for our audience to get into it a little bit, so we can kind of lead up to some of the things that you are doing today to redeem all that you have been through. If you wouldn't mind, maybe you could back us up a little bit, because man, so much of who we are is impacted by those early impressionable years in our lives, right? So for you, what did that look like?
Well, there are some very discrete moments that I think about and I point to as being kind of these sentinel events. So, when I was very young, I had traumatic interactions. For example, my father fell off a roof, and watching his limp, unconscious body lay there and feeling like a helpless young man, and I was helpless. I made a vow that day that I would never be helpless again, right? A vow that, quite frankly, propelled me through a lot of really ugly and self-destructive behaviors. But that vow actually kept me moving toward that path of self-sufficiency, of independence, of being helpful, not helpless. But ultimately that vow, became very, very self-destructive itself. And, having my mother die suddenly in a car accident on a day when I had been accepted into medical school and had this great news that above all other people on the planet, I wanted to share with her, and to have that removed, really set me in a path of being angry with God, feeling like that he'd abandoned me. And, at this pinnacle of accomplishment, that he had robbed me of that joy. And not even, I'm going to talk about that vow, and I talk about that anger with God. These are things that were so deep in my soul, I didn't even know they were there. Wow. It took years of prayer and walking with the Lord and seeking his face and being surrounded by wise and kind and compassionate mentors, and for me to finally understand some of the root issues in my life that were robbing me of joy, that were hindering my growth and my ability to continue to mature and develop into the person that, I was created to be. And, when I go into prison, I, I'm there to see if I have a door that opens in people's lives that I can help them see these things and become the great people that they have been created to be. These people that we walk with in prison,
Yeah.
they're incredible.
I know, amazing.
They're
Absolutely.
powerful.
Oh my gosh. I have met some of the coolest people back then and even now when we go in. Chip, you're right. Like rock. I mean, folks that had given the opportunity, right? Not like the ones that they suffered through a lot of times would have been incredible in the world's eyes now, but they're still incredible in God's eyes. That's what we have to remind
and to have a chance to unlock or be a part of unlocking that potential and the love and the joy and the ministry and the hope and all of the fruitfulness that can come from those people, and to watch it blossom. Honestly, that's why I'm doing this. The invitation was not, I've got a job for you to do, is that I have a joy that I'm going to put before you. And if you choose, I'll make it available.
Nice.
And I was, I want that. I want that for the rest of my life. I will not do anything else. 24/7. That's what I'm doing.
Well, and you do it so intently, for sure, as I've come to realize. I mean, especially because you still, like, you have a home right in Greenwich, right, in Connecticut, and you commute to Houston. I hit Texas. That's a long commute, by the way. But,
3 hours.
Yeah, right. Depending on the private jet, I'm sure. No,
no, not anymore.
Not anymore. I know. Well, let's go back there. Let me have a question though. You mentioned God and your anger with him sort of in this moment of time. Obviously your father and your mother, it's hugely damaging in the fact that, part of our identity comes from our relationship with our father and mother in ways that I don't even know all of us really understand. Were you a believer in Jesus at that time? Were you just sort of nominally interested in him? I mean, how did that come about? When did you?
So my mom was a sinner saved by grace. And she had been born again. I don't remember exactly when. I'm guessing I was probably 8, 9, or 10 years old. But I remember really distinct changes in my mom. Of course, she was also, I think, going through menopause at the time. I'm trying to reconstruct the medical history with my new knowledge, from back then, and finding all kinds of wonderful ideas and aspects of my life. But my journey was really one more out of religion. So, and this is, largely coming from, I think, a lot of my father's side of the family, a very kind of legalistic view of religion. You go to church, you go to youth group, and you just do these things. This is part of the equation. And so for me, as I thought about my father in heaven, I really was just projecting an image of my earthly father on him, stronger, more powerful, more distant, and largely more critical, because the standard was higher, right? I wasn't measuring up. And I knew, although externally people were kind of celebrating a lot of the things that I was accomplishing, whether it would be in school or, in sport or whatever it was, I knew on the inside, rotten mess. And so, and I knew he knew that, right? It's almost like that Santa Claus. He sees you when you're sleeping. He knows you. It's very foreboding, kind of very disturbing. Like, oh my gosh, he knows what I'm thinking. Yeah, that's not good. I mean, I have enough.
When you realize that it's kind of an awakening. You go, wait, he's everywhere, everything. He knows it all. That's a little intimidating.
So until I had my born again understanding of who he was, and that was in the midst of a crisis in my own life when I was over 40 years old. So I had years and years and years of really not measuring up.
Yeah. Yeah, I get that. And so that, similar experience. I'm not so sure that's that uncommon as a common issue, I think, especially depending on a generation, when you grew up and expectations. But we as men, I think we got, part of the curse out of the garden was we had to, overachieve and work and do our thing. And it just seems to be wired in us. Society tells us how critically important it is to just climb the ladder. My days in business were back in the 80s, and that was just what you did. Like, it didn't really matter who was in your way. You did what you had to do to get there, right? And so there's a part of that I think all of us, especially as men, are struggle with, even in our own identity, just to say, I got to prove something to the world and to anybody looking.
Or to my
So I
father.
get it. Yeah, or your father, especially your father, right? I mean, especially. And you went on, you pretty accomplished in your career. Let's face it. I mean, you started out in you med school, right? You mentioned being a medicine. Bring us up through that. What was that like? So you had that drive, right?
So, and I grew up in Florida, and went to a public high school, and had been very deep in the drug culture at the same time, where I'm valedictorian of the class, and performing in other ways, but had a secret life, and had a miraculous healing from that. So I didn't die of a drug overdose, which could have easily happened.
Sure.
Then needed to get as far away from that as possible, and so as far north as I could possibly imagine was Nashville, Tennessee. And so went to college at Vanderbilt, and found myself with a new opportunity. Could start with a fresh identity. No one from Florida, or at least from my hometown, no one knew me. So I got to, be fresh, and created kind of a new identity for myself there. One that was kind of a work hard, play hard kind of guy. And, but I have to become the person who is not helpless.
Yeah.
This is a vow, right? And so that takes center stage. Got to a place where I was applying to medical school, which was the goal, and was told we haven't had anyone from Vanderbilt go to Yale in 8 years.
Wow.
And I mean, there was like, if you want to encourage me to do something, tell me I can't.
Right,
That was
exactly.
my mentality. And so and made it my mission to be at Yale, and just like undergraduate school, applied to one medical school, and then got that phone call from the dean of the medical school of it being accepted, not just to the medical school, but to the medical scientist training program, which is even more competitive than the medical school. And that phone call came on the day my mom died in a car accident. So then I go to medical school now, not just a broken young man who's trying to please a father. I'm going to medical school as a young man who is angry with God, and can't really, every time anything good happens, I'm waiting for the next shoe to drop. Right? I can't fully enjoy any good thing in my life because of that, almost like a post-traumatic stress response to good news, you're in medical school, bad news, your mom's been killed. And so I lived with that for years, for decades, and had got married along the way, and was having children. Good things to celebrate. Again, remember, not fully enjoying the goodness.
Sure.
There's always this cringy, almost a Pavlovian response to anything good that happens.
And that's hard. Like, that is but I'm so relatable again. And I'm sure many of our audience are just plugging into your story and going, wow, that is a lot of what, I have experienced myself. And because of that drivenness, that can serve us well in the world we live in, but it doesn't always serve the kingdom cause that we've been called into, does it? I mean, it's that. So take us to that next step. You had obviously accomplished quite a bit, even in your very young age. But yet now you're looking at what's next. How did you even decide where do you go from here? With what the things that you were kind of dealing with there.
Well, so I was unsettled, I would say, in my spirit, right? There was this restlessness, this uncomfortable aspect of being with myself, with my own thoughts, had to keep things moving. And I see that pattern repeating often in young people that I spend time with, right? They don't want to stop moving or being busy because then they have to be with their thoughts, and that's an uncomfortable place to be. I lived like that for a long time, and so got to a place in medicine where suddenly I was confronted with the rest of your life decisions, because I had never really been confronted with that. It was always a discrete 4 years or 7 years or 5 years, blocks of time. And by the way, that would very much play into my prison sentence considerations down the road. I remember that the attorney saying, "Well, the statutory maximum would be 5 years, and you'd probably get out in 4." And I was like, "Oh, 4 years, I can do that."
Yeah, right.
I've done that
Yeah.
several
Let's
times.
set my goal and let's go after it. Let's get this thing rolling here, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, that was a big part of my preparation for that, and unknowingly. Anyway, so went about at first telling my wife, "Listen, I don't think I'm going to be a practicing doctor." And she was pregnant with our second child, and she at that time had gotten to the point where she was at least reasonably aware that I was a little out there, and she was remarkably sanguine about it, remarkably comfortable with, "Okay, well, you'll figure it out." And
Wow.
that kind of search led me to a job in New York working at a hedge fund, and not just any hedge fund, kind of one of the premier hedge funds. And so jumped all the way into the deep end.
Well, okay. So for listeners that don't quite understand what that is, for someone who's working their way into a pretty significant role in life, especially in the areas you cared about, what does that mean? Like, what were you in charge of? What position did you put yourself into? You started
So,
the firm, right? Did you start? Yeah.
unwittingly, completely without having any clue, basically went from the operating room to sitting in an office surrounded by people who are managing billions of dollars, trading hundreds of millions of dollars worth of stock every day, making huge bets. And the upside, of course, is you get paid lots and lots and lots of money. The downside is if you don't perform, you're out. You're done. It's over.
Right.
And so it's a very binary kind of a experience, which is very, very different than a world in medicine where, look, work hard, train, learn, and you'll get there. I mean, it might take you a little longer, a little shorter, but you're going to get there.
So you felt did you feel qualified, or was this intimidating at all to you?
I would say largely ignorant.
Okay. That's not bad all the time.
Right. They say ignorance is bliss.
It's something like that, yeah.
And quite frankly, I think I continue to be ignorant of a lot of things. I think, there's a huge dimension to our lack of awareness.
Mm-hmm.
I thank God, for example, for protecting me from danger seen and unseen. I mean, if on the other side of the veil, we look back and really understand the amount of grace and protection that was afforded us during these are crazy times we live in, right?
Okay.
I mean, I just shudder to think what actually is going on behind the scenes, right? So, I was walking through this journey of being in this high intensity, super high intensity investment environment where performance is a daily expectation, right? Very intense in the same way that the operating room is intense. It's like there's an expectation of performance. There's a persistent driving need to grow. And I mean, it's very present in the operating room and was very present there. So that wasn't different. But of course, now instead of saving lives, you're making money. And so everything becomes a daily measure of, did you make money or not? That's it. That's the only thing that matters. How hard did you work? Not really. That's not important.
So you didn't really feel there was some altruistic part of this where raising funds on behalf of good?
Well, once I started my own fund, I began to put that spin on it because I'm managing money for police officers and teachers and sovereign wealth funds and yeah, there becomes that spin. But my wife was disgusted with me. You lose more sleep about your performance financially than you
Wow.
ever did when you had people's lives
Oh, wow.
literally in your hands.
Our wives are amazing, aren't they? Sometimes they speak truth.
Oh,
We
my
just,
wife is amazing.
yeah.
She can really push the buttons.
I'm sure you responded really favorably to that and said, you know what, you're right. I'm going to stop doing this. No? No.
I did not. I did
Oh,
not.
okay.
I did not react, and I was astonished at her astonishment. But do you realize how much is on the line? Yeah, but it's not a life. It actually goes to show you how at that point in my life what I was valuing, right? And life was not really a high value item for me. I mean, even in the operating room, even as a physician, I actually didn't really think about the life that was in my hand. I actually just thought about it as a job, as a practice, as a vocation. The importance of the moments and some of the hardest things I look back on in my life are the moments where I had an opportunity to actually be a loving presence and I wasn't.
What do you think? Like, again, getting into the brokenness piece of this, was there any thought at all to what was driving this, desire? Because I imagine big house, right?
Eventually, yeah.
Eventually, right? Probably pretty nice car, pretty nice stuff from a world's perspective. I'm relating my story to. Do you? What drove that? For me, it was like a significance thing. Like I had to prove something, right? We talked about it earlier. Do you think that's had a lot to do with what? In retrospect, what do you think was driving?
Well, for me, I don't think so my reputation was the thing that I was working towards in terms of significance. All of the cars and houses and even the family, all of that was an attempt to really fill a vacancy, a void in my heart that I was trying to, I was looking for soul satisfaction. And, putting, uh, you know, there's a great quote. I was putting my lips to the dirt of the earth and looking for the flavor, the taste of satisfaction, right? And it was evil. That's evil thing to do, to look for something that can't be found there, and yet completely unaware of the soul satisfaction that was awaiting me down the road. Something completely different.
Yeah, great perspective. Really is. It's funny how we could look back on things and we get a different point of view. Okay, what went sideways? What happened?
Oh, lots went. I mean, I was pretty much sideways the whole way. The question is, what was discovered? I among other trades, but one particular trade I made on the basis of a phone call that I got from France, and this doctor informed me of a problem in a clinical trial, and we sold the stock, and that resulted in an investigation that was handed off to the Department of Justice, who at the time was super excited about really seriously punishing anyone who had committed a financial crime in the wake of the 2007-2008 crisis.
Right.
And so I was kind of a one-off. There were a whole bunch of related cases at the time, but I was one that was kind of separate and carved out as a one-off. I was I guess a relatively big fish, brought down a very large, $10 billion plus firm, and an example of the greed an example of the deceitfulness and the manipulation and the brokenness of, I mean, not just the financial markets, but society, and held up in that way. And the truth is, the story was actually worse than that.
Wow. How so?
Because that didn't really address the secret lives that I was living, the damage that I was doing to my wife, to my family, to my community. You know, I had this lie that was echoing in my head, which was, what they don't know can't hurt them, which is utterly ridiculous
Sure.
in retrospect. But I was like, you know, as long as I kept things secret, it didn't really matter what you did because nobody would be hurt. And I was a very, you know, deceitful husband and not a present father. So right there, you've got arguably my first responsibility completely abdicated. I was leading my team and people within my organization, leading them down a very bad path, a path of materialism and moral relativism and secular humanism. I mean, ways of behaving with regard to women and your job and money and those things that were, I mean, very destructive. And, you know, thank God I got taken out of that equation. I mean, I was hurting people all over the world. And so, you know, I'm grateful that God intervened, and I know God is gentle. So he did not hammer me. He actually was very gentle with me and brought me in a very loving way down a journey. And it involved 4 years in prison. It involved a lot of very, very harsh, overt confessions to my wife and my children about the person that I was, and a fierce determination to not go back.
Well, and that, so there was that come to Jesus moment, I guess. Then, when you were resolved, you cooperated with the government to make this.
No, I did not cooperate. I pled guilty.
You did not. You pled. Okay. Oh, gotcha. Difference, obviously.
Big difference, especially
big
in
difference.
prison. That's a big difference.
Big difference. Sorry, not a snitch.
I mean, look, the Lord was very clear to me. He said, "This is for you. This is not for anyone else."
Yeah, good, great distinction. Thank you, because that is mercy in its greatest sense, to be able to actually change your plea or decide to plead guilty and then just take the hit, whatever that looks like. Pretty amazing. Was there a certain remorsefulness or repentance that took place prior to going, or did something happen when you reported to camp that made a difference for you?
Oh, so yeah, in the midst of the nuclear meltdown of my life, I began to have a couple of dreams that guided me on a journey. That journey led me, there were people that were put into my life that led me to the New Canaan Society. The New Canaan Society came around me and loved me and showed me a friendship that I don't think I'd ever experienced in my life, certainly not from a community perspective like that. They invited me to a national retreat where Jack Deere presented to me the person of Jesus Christ in a way I had never heard before. Maybe my heart had never been open to it before, but everything changed that weekend. I mean, everything changed. And that was in April. I would say the next series of weeks, I found myself face down in my office, weeping every day over the brokenness of my life that was being revealed to me, and at the same time being loved as that brokenness was revealed. In October, later that year, made a full confession to my wife about everything. And that
so
was,
she wasn't aware of everything that
no, she was not. I was a really good secret life guy.
Yeah, so that had to be a healing, a part of this that was really important to you.
Well, it was a ripping off, a revealing of the wounds.
Yeah.
And that opened the door. as she put it, for the possibility of forgiveness. And went to prison in January, so 3 months later, with a completely decimated marriage, leaving her abandoned with 4 young children in a very big house with a lot of responsibility and the looming fear of utter complete financial ruin. And I went away to men's camp,
Yes.
where I
Yeah.
had the favor of God and was ministered to and loved. So the hero of my story is my wife. It is not me.
Yeah. And bring back a little bit of memory of myself for that. And I unfortunately, in my case, it didn't work the same way, but I can see such an extreme value in relationship and confession and repentance and redemption. That redemption story you talked about earlier, it impacted not just how you responded coming out of there, but also how many people around you and your kids. Look. I mean, right. I mean, the children, the kids, they were young, right? What were the ages at the time?
They were 12, 10, 7, and 5.
Yeah, and look at now the legacy is completely rewritten where it could have been for so many years. You went to camp, you developed some really cool relationships, didn't you? In fact, pretty
Yes.
early on. Yeah. How tell us about at least one of them that I'm aware of, and maybe others. But
Well, I mean, the first, how you get welcomed to prison is often very meaningful. So I showed up at the front gate. A man dressed in greens came up and extended his hand and said, "Hey, welcome. I'm Chip." And I said, "Wow, I'm Chip too." And he goes, "Remember that. I'm Chip 1, you're Chip 2."
Chip too. They're
And
before you and maybe they're after. I don't know.
and then he looked down at my Bible and he said, "Just remember," because I was carrying my Bible with me. I walked in with my glasses, a cross, my wedding ring, and a Bible. That's it. And I don't even think you can walk in with that anymore.
No, I don't think you can either. You're right. You can have it sent to you maybe, but yeah.
So he said, "Remember this, all things work together for the good." And I said, for those who love God and are called according to his purpose. And he said, "My brother," and he embraced me. So that's how I walked into prison. I walked in with the declaration of a promise that I had been standing on, meeting a guy named Chip, who was already there before me, and being, welcomed into a community there that, ultimately became something that was so rich and so precious in my life that when I finally did come home 4 years later, the absence of that community left me feeling utterly lonely and desperate.
Wow. Yes. Wow. It puts some perspective on community. It was obviously set up. God put someone right in your path for a reason, and I'm sure we could talk for hours on that. We'll condense it, but think about the value of community, not just the ones we have now, but even in our darkest moments. Right? He placed somebody in your path. That's incredible. That's so
Well,
good.
the whole story of the Torah is about community. The whole reason that God was so adamant about these capital crimes in the commandments, it was because that they were offenses that fractured community, and that it had to be absolutely obliterated and severed. And it was all about preserving community. Of course, we have a different paradigm today in the age of grace, but that community that I was exposed to inside, I mean, in my mind, as I read, that used to be the community that we actually had out here. And it's just vanished here.
Good
And
point.
it's not surprising then that we have an epidemic of anxiety and loneliness and depression and suicide.
Yes.
In the absence of the community, because I could endure prison. Prison was actually, I mean, there were hard things about it, but walking through hard things in community like that, I'm telling, it's easy.
Yeah, well, because you guys even did like Bible studies, right? You guys created a
Every night.
constant, like all the time. what else is there to do? I guess you could lift weights and run track, stuff that I did,
Oh
things
yeah,
like
there's a
that.
lot to do. No,
Yeah,
there's a
there's
lot to
something.
do. It's
Yeah,
a busy, it's a busy
yeah,
community,
yeah,
but
yeah, yeah.
we really did devote ourselves to eating together, praying together,
Mm,
studying together, and having fellowship.
man. So when you got released, and that was what year again? Remind us.
15.
15. Uh, what you're doing now wasn't on your radar, but it sounds to me like you had, and it was impacted enough. You were impacted enough by the experience that you said, "Hey, I can't not. I have to somehow stay plugged into this community and give back." Right?
I think what happened was, so I came home. I certainly had prison ministry was on my heart because, quite frankly, the men there had my heart. So it was just you're going to follow your heart. Whatever. If
no
you
doubt.
if you love money, you're going to follow money. If
Mm-hmm.
you love prisoners, you're going to follow prisoners. It's just the way it's going to be.
Yeah.
And you can try to divert it, but it's not going to last very long. And
No.
so no matter what I was doing, they were, they were on my heart. And so how was I going to find a way to satisfy my heart's desires? And we started a prison ministry in Connecticut that was an extension of the New Cane Society called NCS Inside. And it's been thriving for 9 years. And what I never would have guessed, in my mind, God was going to say, okay, I'm going to give you things to do in the business world, and do those things. And good that you're not going to find your sense of satisfaction and joy and self-worth in those things. And then you're going to take the fruit of that, and you're going to, be an investor and invest your time and your wealth and your money, your talents into prison ministry. I had no clue that it was going to be a job. Like, that was not on the radar. And quite frankly, man did not invite me here. That's not why I'm here. I would not be here at man's invitation. And so the whole journey home for me was both God preparing me for what I'm doing now, giving me an appreciation for what it is that I am doing actually, and then opening the door for me to walk into it.
And that's so meaningful because for much of our audience, they've got some previews of what it is you're doing right now, but and we're going to put more in the show notes that people connect with you later. If I recall, you're not quite sure how you got plugged into prison entrepreneurship program, right? But you did in a pretty big way. It's pretty significant. Tell folks what do you do? What are you up to? This is amazing. I know already, so you tell them.
Well, I mean, quite frankly, I'm just following. That's what I'm doing. I'm following. One of my mentors shared with me that at the season of his life, he's really taken with the statement that Jesus made when he said, I only see what my Father's doing, and I do that thing. Mm-hmm. Right. And that's where I want to be. Right. I want to be in a place where I'm actually not leading. I'm just following. We talk about making good choices all the time. Followers aren't making good choices. They're just following. That's all they're doing. And so I want to be in that kind of a mindset where I'm just walking according to the Spirit, almost like Paul did. But, what Prison Entrepreneurship Program represents is something reasonably unique. I don't know of really any other robust program of its kind. And what I mean specifically is a program where we are creating community on the inside and then spanning the fence, and that community then thriving on the outside. So it's a community that actually spans the walls of prison. And the connective tissue, the elements of the community are kind of the most unlikely partners, right? So you have the participants, the people who live in prison and ultimately get out.
Okay.
But then you have these high-performing executive volunteers. What in the world? How do these people, how do they fall in love? Like, what is that? It doesn't make sense. And, when you're here, you kind of start to get the picture, right? So you can understand on the prisoner side that here are these people who, live in the C-suite,
Mm-hmm.
many of them quite affluent, very educated, many of them very successful. They're coming in and spending time with me. And it
Wow.
seems like they actually care. Like
Yeah,
that's crazy, right? So you get the astonishment and the excitement on the prisoner side, like that. You can get that.
right.
The other part's a little more subtle.
Mm.
And, I just came from a meeting this morning. A very, very high performing guy, private equity, extraordinary talent, and an amazing story. And where he is in his life, arguably at 60 years old, at the pinnacle of where he would be from a worldly perspective.
Sure.
He's lonely. He's looking for purpose and significance in his life. And so what we are essentially doing is opening the door for people like him and hundreds others to come and connect with one of the most surprising, one of the most shocking truths that they could ever imagine, that these people who they always regarded for their whole lives as worthless, garbage,
That's right. That's right.
unproductive.
Yep.
They come in and they see, not only do they see talent, capacity, gifts, they see those things, but they see something that they want. They see an authenticity, an openness, a boldness in sharing the brokenness of their lives that actually allows for a connection like they don't ever have out here. If you go to, I don't know, if you're meeting with your LPs or you're meeting with your business partners or your vendors, it's not like you walk into the meeting and say, can we just start with a word of prayer? Can
Yes,
can
exactly.
we talk for a minute about our families
Mm.
and share how our marriages are doing? I mean, there's no place for that. You can't even do it in many churches and those
Right.
gatherings. You don't dare be authentic there because
Yeah.
now you're going to be judged.
You're
And
exposed.
so
Right. Yeah, you
so
got to
this
take the big leap
becomes
off. Yeah.
this becomes a very, very sacred
Wow.
kind of a community, and the love and affection that is born in the prison then translates outside.
Yeah. So that's not a story most people even just like go to the website. Well, okay, so it tells you a lot about the success of the organization, the program, but it doesn't tell you all of that, right? You don't. There's no. It does, but not the deeper things like the places that you've had the opportunity here today to share with someone you didn't expect, right? That wasn't on the agenda when you showed up at the meeting. So
No,
you went
but
places
it's
that
on everyone's heart because
yes,
the society that we're living in today is so radically devoid
yeah,
of elements of this that we find ourselves increasingly alone and isolated. Yeah, social media has a role in it, but
hmm
it's actually a medicinal role. We're trying to find the connections there, and they're not there, that
right.
we desperately want, and we're encountering that in prison.
Yeah. Well, that's um, to go a little bit deeper. Just for folks to understand what's happening at PEP, and again, we'll send people, anybody that wants to learn more about it. It's incredible what you're doing, and you've only it's been about 7 months, maybe you've been with the
Yeah, so
organization.
I'm standing on the shoulders of 20 years
Yeah, yeah,
of data-driven, refined program, tweaking, massaging, getting this thing essentially to a place where it's now scalable. So I've been here 7 months, but make no mistake about it, this 20-year history
yeah.
has set the stage for what we're about to do.
Well, and I see it. I'll glance to my side again here. Just looking from the economic mobility perspective, right? 100% employment rate within 90 days of release. That's pretty good. Would you say? I would say that's pretty good.
Well, it's that 90-day period is kind of defined as a critical window, right?
Right.
We actually have 24 days is the average time
Okay.
to employment.
Okay.
And, but getting people employed in that first 90 days is, I would say it is it's the icing on the cake, which is the cake is the community support that is allowing all
Yeah.
of the things that are necessary to go in that direction.
Right. And to your point, right? 700 businesses formed by graduate entrepreneurs. That's
Yeah.
incredible. I mean, that's,
Yeah.
and of
It's
course, you're in a
crazy.
state, it's great. Like that's unheard of. Like that just doesn't happen. Like we go into the local prison here. It's a county prison, and usually it's short timers, people that are either parole violations or things that they can be, or end up upstate. So there tends to be a circular motion for a lot of folks in that situation. We get a chance to minister to them, but I can tell you, they're not, there's very few entrepreneurs coming out of it, at least at that level. And 80% of the graduates have active savings account with it, and with FICO scores of 625 after first year. That's another monumental achievement for most folks who end up in those positions. So again, I know we like metrics, we love to be able to measure success stories, but in the end, even that translates into changed lives, doesn't it?
Yeah, this is the fruit of civic wealth.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, taking the most unlikely and making that the expectation.
Yeah.
Right? It's not about don't go back to prison. It's about when you buy in your house. Let's go.
Even though you said I'm not coming back here again, there was a will that went a lot deeper than your mind to make that not happen. You have to go somewhere else. So it's like not there, but somewhere. Man, that's so true. That's so true. Your life is significant. Look, we've had a chance to spend a little time together. I can see the impact, the enthusiasm for what you're doing right now. If you were to, I don't know, if you're trying to sum things up a little bit here in terms of what you've learned through this experience, and what would you want to share with anyone interested in just going deeper into their own transformational journey with Christ? What does it look like for you? What would be the greatest takeaway for somebody in our audience that would go, oh my gosh, this is an incredible story, but I need more.
Yeah, so God is a relational God. And outside of a community where there is authenticity, transparency, love and intimacy, where people actually know everything about you, we are vulnerable in ways we can't imagine. I have a Bible study that I've been a part of for 8 years. And about 2 years ago, one of the members of my Bible study woke up in the morning on Saturday, told his wife he was going to Bible study, and went into the woods and killed himself.
Oh my goodness.
And it was a very significant shock to us that here we are studying the Word of God. We are praying together. We are ostensibly sharing our lives together. And yet someone here was sitting, struggling with depression, and we had no idea. There's clearly a deeper level of intimacy that we are being invited into. And, the forces that we're fighting in this struggle of life are spiritual forces that are way beyond us. And we have to step forward with weapons, spiritual weapons, to fight this fight. And we have to do that together. And, that's an environment that is free from judgment, free of condemnation, and is not, looking at referring to any group or individual as the other, but one that is welcoming and loving, and recognizing that the good news is for everyone.
Yes.
It's not just for, this little holy circle of believers. The good news is for everyone. I don't care what tradition, faith, I don't care how much time you got, what your sentence was for, your crime. I don't care what the past is. That opens the door for the great redemption stories that God wants to actually do and then deliver to us as a society, as a hope.
Amen. I couldn't have said it better myself. That was awesome way to wrap it up.
Well, I think we're of one mind on this, Steve.
Well, we are. I mean, come on. Like we limped through some pretty bad decisions that we thought we were somehow, I don't know, we could talk another hour about those, even the decision-making process that landed us in places we didn't expect to be. But the story that what you just said is the most critical piece of all this. And if we're not if we don't show up with our authentic self and our willingness to reach into places we've never been before, and I tell you what, like the time is short. I know plenty. I was living on the fence for so many years. Like, no fence sitters allowed. Like, if you're in the kingdom, if you're a Christ follower, like, get in the game. Ask him what that looks like for you. Don't just get in anywhere you randomly. But I know you're going to be speaking to a lot of people that will take this to heart and will do something to at least draw closer enough to hear the Lord, shift their priorities into something that's more kingdom focused. Because you said it earlier. Look, these are desperate times. It's crazy. It's a crazy world we live in. The compromise, the stuff going on, and it's I love to hear stories like this. I know our audience will love to hear stories like this. Can you help us to know if anybody wants to get in touch with you, or at least understand more about PEP? Where would they go? Can they support the ministry in some way? Like, help us understand what that.
Well, I mean, certainly our website is a simple place to start. It's pep.org.
Easy.
I would encourage, though, I mean, certainly I think with 20 years of history, PEP has a lot to offer. So we have a lot of learning, and we are eager to share that learning with municipalities, with government, with local agencies, with churches. Okay. We are eager to do that.
Okay.
In Texas, we are expanding significantly. And then regionally, we're looking to expand, and we're going to have partnerships to do that. This is not something that PEP is not the one-stop solution for the challenges that our society faces. We have 25 million people who have come home from prison who are facing institutional barriers to human thriving that we as a society need to address. Yes. And we don't at our own peril. Yeah. So the very fabric, the very nature of our communities and our society depends on us addressing this. And we have to come together as a community to do it. PEP is one component, but it takes the whole community saying, no, we recognize that mass incarceration is a root cause of a cycle of poverty that needs to be broken. And we will not incarcerate our way out of it. We have to love and hope and cause human thriving as a means of getting our way out of this. And PEP is just one part of it.
Yeah. Well, and we are the most, I think, incarcerated society in the world, aren't we? At this point, like we
don't know about China, but yeah, probably.
Well, we don't know about China, but let's toss them away, throw them behind bars. It's for many, it's a money making proposition. There's just so much behind this, it makes no sense. But because I meet guys like this and gals, like we're ministering to women in prison too. There's a hunger, a desire from many, as you know, for a different life. And I think for us, it's just providing hope and for the future. Chip, thank you. Listen, your time with us has been special. I am going to make sure that all of this gets in the show notes. Anybody that wants to go deeper, thank you, brother. I appreciate it. And listen, we will be staying in touch. So
we are. There'll be a chapter 2.
It's always chapter 2. And you know what? Who knows? Maybe there'll be PEPs out. Texas is a little easier to operate in some states. I know that. But listen, blessings, brother. Thank you. Good to have you.
Thank you, Steve. Thanks for having me.
This was another episode of the Embracing Brokenness podcast. For more information on Embracing Brokenness Ministries, or to subscribe to our blog, podcast, YouTube channel, or engage with us on social media, please visit our website at embracingbrokenness.org. Thanks for joining us.